Hi.
Welcome to V-Stories. How are we doing today? We are going to be reading a story, and today it will be the Bible first. Then, Kim, do you want to do the synopsis?
Yeah. You're not in my picture.
Kim is going to do the synopsis, and then we are going to be doing Ben Hur.
Thank you for one person showing up to talk to me. So I need a consensus on what we think of this, the portrait format of the picture. We're working on lighting, more to follow. So I know this isn't like traditional television style and all that and everything. There's nothing traditional about 2020, so it is what it is. All right, so we've got Ben-Hur. We're on book 4 today. Can you believe we're on book 4? And we've got the Bible. So first we're going to start with Judges. Chapter 14, we talked about Samson's birth. Now we're going to talk about Samson's marriage. All right. Samson went down to Timnah and at Timnah he saw one of the daughters of the Philistines. Then he came up and told his father and mother. Does that help with the lighting? We've actually got another solution. But actually, while we're stopped, I'm going to put this on hold. And I wanted to say before I started reading, and I'll start over. But I wanted to say, JJ, you turned that light on and then you stood right in the light. So what good does that do? It just makes me in a big shadow.
Come on, buddy.
It's actually worse than having the light. Okay, so I forgot what I was saying. Okay, so I want to thank one of our viewers. What?
It's me.
No, it wasn't you. Okay, so some people think that they know what I'm saying before I actually say it. So if you're one of those, then you need to listen more. Okay, so I want to thank one of our viewers for pointing out a discrepancy that I had in the order that I did one of the YouTube playlists. I think that I have fixed it. And if you want to go to YouTube now, the Ben-Hur videos should be in order. I had mixed up the 4th and 5th videos of book 1, and I think that they are fixed now. And so please go and check and make sure. JJ, I don't think it's going to work. I think that light is going to fall. JJ, are you listening? I don't think JJ is listening. All right. So I think it's gonna fall because the dog just walked by and almost knocked it over. Okay, so we are on once again. We'll start over with Judges chapter 14. It's a really good try though. Okay, with the cord dangling, I don't think it worked. This is the English Standard Version of the Bible. I'm sorry that we're dark. We're back in the dark. This is Judges chapter 14. Samson went down to Timnah, and at Timnah he saw one of the daughters of the Philistines. Then he came up and told his father and mother, I saw one of the daughters of the Philistines at Timnah. Now get her for me as my wife. But his father and mother said to him, Is there not a woman among the daughters of your relatives, or among all our people, that you must go and take a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines? But Samson said to his father, Get her for me, for she is right in my eyes. His father and mother did not know that it was from the Lord, for he was seeking an opportunity against the Philistines. At that time, the Philistines ruled over Israel. What is the noise in the other room?
Nothing.
I feel like I'm hearing something. Sorry, I'm having ADD today. Then Samson went down with his father and mother to Timnah, and they came to the vineyards of Timnah, and behold, a young lion came toward him, roaring. Then the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him, and although he had nothing in his hand, he tore the lion in pieces, as one tears a young goat. But he did not tell his father or mother what he had done. Then he went down and talked with the woman, and she was right in Samson's eyes. After some days he returned to take her, and he turned aside to see the carcass of the lion, and behold, there was a swarm of bees in the body of the lion, and honey. He scraped it out into his hands and went on, eating as he went. And he came to his father and mother, and gave some to them, and they ate. But he did not tell them he had scraped the honey from the carcass of a lion. His father went down to the woman, and Samson prepared a feast there, so the young men used to do. As soon as the people saw him, they brought 30 companions to be with him, and Samson said to them, Let me now put a riddle to you. If you can tell me what it is within the 7 days of the feast, and find it out, then I will give you 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothes. But if you cannot tell me what it is, then you shall give me 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothes. And they said to him, Put your riddle, that we may hear it. And he said to them, Out of the eater came something to eat. Out of the strong came something sweet. And in 3 days they could not solve the riddle. On the 4th day they said to Samson's wife, Entice your husband to tell us what the riddle is, lest we burn you and your father's house with fire. Have you invited us here to impoverish us? And Samson's wife wept over him and said, You only hate me, you do not love me. You have put a riddle to my people, and you have not told me what it is. And he said to her, Behold, I have not told my father nor my mother, and shall I tell you? She wept before him, and 7 days that their feast lasted, and on the 7th day he told her, because she pressed him hard. Then she told the riddle to her people, and the men of the city said to him on the 7th day, before the sun went down, What is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than a lion? And he said to them, If you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have found out my riddle. And the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him, and he went down to Ashkelon, and struck down 30 men of the town, and took their spoil, and gave the garments to them who had told the riddle. In hot anger he went back to his father's house, and Samson's wife was given to his companion, who had been his best man. That's the end of Judges chapter 14. So, Samson, it's hard to know what to think of Samson. So, all right. So we're going to read Judges chapter 15 tomorrow. And now we're going to continue with Ben-Hur chapter 4, or book 4. And first, we have, Granny Bear says hi, JJ. First, we have a synopsis from Kimberly.
Hi,
Kimberly, are you doing the synopsis today?
Yep.
Whoa, JJ, please don't. Listen, this is kind of precarious right here. Okay, so we're gonna do that.
Okay.
Do it that way.
So what happened in the last chapters was, well, they got knocked off the boat, and then they found this plank. Ben-Hur and the other guy, I forget his name.
Arius.
Yeah, Arius. Ben-Hur and Arius. Arius was like half drowned, so Ben-Hur, he kind of helped him and everything, and he didn't die or anything, you know. And so eventually there was this ship, and
Ben-Hur kind of helped him. Like, he basically rescued him, right?
yeah,
Arius would have died if it weren't for Ben-Hur,
Yeah.
right? Go ahead.
so what happened next was Ben-Hur wasn't sure if it was his own or the pirate ship. So when he saw that it was going to help this other ship, they knew that it was not a pirate ship.
What did Arius keep asking him?
He kept asking him to take his ring.
No, before that. in order to identify the ship.
Oh,
What was he supposed to be looking for?
flags.
Flags, yeah.
And he kept asking him to take his ring and be like, "Hey, go over to this place, and this guy, he'll give you anything you want, and if I live through this, then I'll give you anything you want." And he didn't do that. It was kind of like that.
Yeah, it's kind of like that.
He didn't do that. He said, "No, I think we can make it."
Why didn't he do that? Why did Judah not accept his ring and eventually throw it into the ocean?
Because he didn't. It was.
Okay, so I'll tell you. They didn't know what the ship was. They didn't know if the ship was good guys or bad guys. And if it was bad guys, they were basically going to torture Arius and probably enslave him and make him hate life, pretty much.
And Ben-Hur would have been a rower again.
Ben-Hur would have been a rower again, but so that's what would have happened if they were bad guys. But since they didn't know if they were bad guys, Arius told Ben-Hur, "Hey, listen, if we find out that they're bad guys, I want you to just throw me into the ocean, and I'll just die, and that'll be better than getting taken captive by these dudes," right? And Ben-Hur said,
"Nope."
No. That's the key thing. And Ben-Hur first tried to give him back the ring, and when Arius wouldn't accept the ring, Ben-Hur threw it into the ocean and said, "Nope, I am not going to kill you to prevent you from being tortured or whatever, blah, 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 because it is against my law, and I can't go against my law." All right, keep going.
And so they found out that it was actually good guys, and so they called out and they found him, and then Arius adopted Ben-Hur.
Yes, and so when they got back to Rome, and certain places where you're standing makes the lighting really bad. So no, it's not your fault. So when they got back to Rome, Arius signed all the paperwork and got everything squared away so that he eventually, basically, I don't know if adopted is the right word. I think that's the word that they used in the book, but I mean, Ben-Hur was basically a grown man. He was a young grown man, but I mean, basically. So anyway, especially in that society, I think that they tended to grow up a little bit earlier than they do in ours. Anyway, so now we're going to read book 4, which is, as in all the books in this, they have a little excerpt of something literary. Hey, why don't we stop eating cookies while we're listening? Okay, thank you. All right, so this says, Alva, should the monarch prove unjust, and at this time, Queen, then I must wait for justice until it come, and they are happiest far, whose consciences may calmly wait their right. Friedrich von Schiller, Don Carlos, Act 4, Scene 15. I don't even know what that story is about, so more to follow. This is Book 4, Chapter 1, Ben-Hur Returns East. The month to which we now come is July, the year that of our Lord, 29, and the place Antioch, then Queen of the East, and next to Rome the strongest, if not the most populous, city in the world. Antioch, yes, probably the second largest city in the Roman Empire. If not, it was Alexandria at that time, and it's a toss-up. They're both pretty important cities in that time. There is an opinion that the extravagance and dissoluteness of the age had their origin in Rome and spread thence throughout the empire, that the great cities but reflected the manners of their mistress on the Tiber. That's Rome. this may be doubted. The reaction of the conquest would seem to have been upon the morals of the conqueror. In Greece she found a spring of corruption, so also in Egypt, and the student, having exhausted the subject, will close the books assured that the flow of the demoralizing river was from the east westwardly, and that this very city of Antioch, one of the oldest seats of Assyrian power and splendor, was a principal source of the deadly stream. A transport galley entered the mouth of the river Orontes from the blue waters of the sea. It was in the forenoon. The heat was great, yet all on board who could avail themselves of the privilege were on deck, Ben-Hur among others. The 5 years had brought the young Jew to perfect manhood, though the robe of white linen in which he was attired somewhat masked his form. His appearance was unusually attractive for an hour and more he had occupied a seat in the shade of the sail, and in that time several fellow passengers of his own nationality had tried to engage him in conversation, but without avail. His replies to their questions had been brief, though gravely courteous, and in the Latin tongue. The purity of his speech, his cultivated manners, his reticence served to stimulate their curiosity the more. Such as observed him closely were struck by the incongruity between his demeanor, which had the ease and grace of a patrician, and certain points of his person. Thus his arms were disproportionately long, and when to steady himself against the motion of the vessel, he took hold of anything nearby. The size of his hands and their evident power compelled remark. So the wonder who and what he was mixed continually with a wish to know the particulars of his life. In other words, his air cannot be better described than as a notice. This man has a story to tell. The galley, in coming, had stopped at one of the ports of Cyprus, and picked up a Hebrew of most respectable appearance, quiet, reserved, paternal. Ben-Hur ventured to ask him some questions. The replies won his confidence, and resulted finally in an extended conversation. It chanced also that as the galley from Cyprus entered the receiving bay of the Orontes, 2 other vessels which had been sighted out in the sea met it, and passed into the river at the same time. And as they did so, both the strangers threw out small flags of brightest yellow. There was much conjecture as to the meaning of the signals. At length a passenger addressed himself to the respectable Hebrew for information upon the subject. "Yes, I know the meaning of the flags," he replied. "They do not signify nationality. They are merely marks of ownership." "Has the owner many ships?" "He has." "You know him?" "I have dealt with him." The passengers looked at the speaker as if requesting him to go on. Ben-Hur listened with interest. "He lives in Antioch," the Hebrew continued in his quiet way. That he is vastly rich has brought him into notice, and the talk about him is not always kind. There used to be in Jerusalem a prince of very ancient family named Hur." Judah strove to be composed, yet his heart beat quicker. "The prince was a merchant with a genius for business. He set on foot many enterprises, some reaching far east, others west. In the great cities he had branch houses. The one in Antioch was in charge of a man said by some to have been a family servant called Simonides, Greek in name, yet an Israelite. The master was drowned at sea. His business, however, went on, and was scarcely less prosperous. After a while, misfortune overtook the family. The prince's only son, nearly grown, tried to kill the procurator Gratus in one of the streets of Jerusalem. He failed by a narrow chance, and has not since been heard of. In fact, the Romans' rage took in the whole house. Not one of the name was left alive. Their palace was sealed up, and now a rookery for pigeons. The estate was confiscated. Everything that could be traced to the ownership of the Hers was confiscated. The procurator cured his heart with a golden salve. The passengers laughed. "You mean he kept the property?" said one of them. "They say so," said the Hebrew. "I am only telling a story as I received it." And to go on, Simonides, who had been the prince's agent here in Antioch, opened trade in a short time on his own account, and in a space incredibly brief became the master merchant of the city. In imitation of his master, he sent caravans to India, and on the sea at present he has galleys enough to make a royal fleet. They say nothing goes amiss with him. His camels do not die except of old age. His ships never founder. If he throw a chip into the river, it will come back to him gold. How long has he been going on thus? Not 10 years. He must have had a good start. Yes, they say the procurator took only the prince's property ready at hand, his horses, cattle, houses, land, vessels, goods. The money could not be found, though there must have been vast sums of it. What became of it has been an unsolved mystery. "Not to me," said a passenger with a sneer. "I understand you," the Hebrew answered. "Others have had your idea. That it furnished old Simonides his start is a common belief. The procurator is of that opinion, or he has been, for twice in 5 years he has caught the merchant and put him to torture." Judah griped the rope he was holding. I think it's supposed to be gripped, but it's missing a P, so it's griped. The rope he was holding with crushing force. "It is said," the narrator continued, "that there is not a sound bone in the man's body. The last time I saw him, he sat in a chair, a shapeless cripple, propped against cushions." "So tortured," exclaimed several listeners in a breath. "Disease could not have produced such a deformity. Still the suffering made no impression upon him. All he had was his lawfully, and he was making lawfully use of it. All he had was his lawfully, and he was making lawful use of it. That was the most they wrung from him. Now, however, he is past persecution. He has a license to trade signed by Tiberius himself." Tiberius was the Caesar. He paid roundly for it, I warrant. These ships are his," the Hebrew continued, passing the remark. "It is a custom among his sailors to salute each other upon meeting by throwing out yellow flags, sight of which is as much as to say, we have had a fortunate voyage." The story ended there. When the transparent was fairly in the channel of the river, Judah spoke to the Hebrew. "What was the name of the merchant's master?" "Ben-Hur, Prince of Jerusalem." "What became of the prince's family?" "The boy was sent to the galleys. I may say he is dead. 1 year is the ordinary limit of life under that sentence. The widow and daughter have not been heard of. Those who know what became of them will not speak. They died doubtless in the cells of one of the castles which spot the waysides of Judea." Judah walked to the pilot's quarter. So absorbed was he in thought that he scarcely noticed the shores of the river, which from sea to city were surpassingly beautiful, with orchards of all the Syrian fruits and vines clustered about villas rich as those of Neapolis. No more did he observe the vessels passing in an endless fleet, nor hear the singing and shouting of the sailors, some in labor, some in merriment. The sky was full of sunlight, lying in hazy warmth upon the land and the water. Nowhere except over his life was there a shadow. Once only he awoke to a momentary interest, and that was when someone pointed out the grove of Daphne, discernible from a bend in the river. Chapter 2, on the Orontes. When the city came into view, the passengers were on deck, eager that nothing of the scene might escape them. The respectable Jew already introduced to the reader was the principal spokesman. "The river here runs to the west," he said, in the way of general answer. "I remember when it washed the base of the walls, but as Roman subjects we have lived in peace, and as always happens in such times, trade has had its will. Now the whole river is taken up with wharves and docks yonder." The speaker pointed southward. "Is a Mount Cassius, or, as these people love to call it, the mountains of Orontes, looking across to its brother Amnus in the north, and between them lies the plain of Antioch. Farther on are the Black Mountains, whence the ducts of the kings bring the purest water to wash the thirsty streets and people, yet they are forests in wilderness state, dense and full of birds and beasts." "Where is the lake?" one asked. "Over north there. You can take horse if you wish to see it, or, better, a boat, for a tributary connects it with the river." "The Grove of Daphne," he said to a third inquirer. "Nobody can describe it, only beware. It was begun by Apollo, and completed by him. He prefers it to Olympus. People go there for one look, just one, and never come away. They have a saying which tells it all: better be a worm and feed on the mulberries of Daphne than a king's guest." "Then you advise me to stay away from it?" "Not I. Go you will. Everybody goes. Cynic philosopher, virile boy, women, and priests, all go. So sure am I of what you will do that I assume to advise you. Do not take quarters in the city, that will be a loss of time, but go at once to the village in the edge of the grove. The way is through a garden under the spray of fountains. The lovers of the god and his Penaean maid built the town, and in its porticos and paths and thousand retreats you will find characters and habits and sweets and kinds elsewhere impossible. But the wall of the city, there it is, the masterpiece of Xerius, the master of mural architecture." All eyes followed his pointing finger. "This part was raised by order of the first of the Seleucidae. 300 years have made it part of the rock it rests upon." The defense justified the encomium. High, solid, and with many bold angles, it curves southwardly out of view. "On top there are 400 towers, each a reservoir of water," the Hebrew continued. "Look now, over the wall. Tall as it is, see in the distance 2 hills, which you may know as the rival crests of Sulpius. The structure on the farthest one is the citadel, garrisoned all the year round by a Roman legion. Opposite it, this way, rises the temple of Jupiter, and under that the front of the legate's residence, a palace full of offices, and yet a fortress against which a mob would dash harmlessly as the south wind." At this point the sailors began taking in sail, whereupon the Hebrew exclaimed heartily, "See, you who hate the sea, and who have vows, get ready your curses and your prayers. The bridge yonder, over which the road to Seleucia is carried, marks the limit of navigation. What the ship unloads for further transit, the camel takes up there. Above the bridge begins the island upon which Callinicus built his new city, connecting it with 5 great viaducts so solid time has made no impression upon them, nor floods, nor earthquakes. Of the main town, my friends, I have only to say you will be happier all your lives for having seen it." As he concluded, the ship turned and made slowly for her wharf under the wall, bringing even more fairly to view the life with which the river at that point was possessed. Finally, the lines were thrown, the oars shipped, and the voyage was done. Then Ben-Hur sought the respectable Hebrew. "Let me trouble you a moment before saying farewell." The man bowed assent. "Your story of the merchant has made me curious to see him. You call him Simonides? Simonides?" "Yes, he is a Jew with a Greek name." "Where is he to be found?" The acquaintance gave a sharp look before he answered. "I may save you mortification. He is not a money-lender." "Nor am I a money-borrower. said Ben-Hur, smiling at the other's shrewdness. The man raised his head and considered an instant. One would think, he then replied, that the richest merchant in Antioch would have a house for business corresponding to his wealth. But if you would find him in the day, follow the river to yon bridge, under which he quarters in a building that looks like a buttress of the wall. Before the door there is an immense landing, always covered with cargoes come and go. The fleet that lies moored there is his. You cannot fail to find him. I give you thanks. The peace of our fathers go with you, and with you. With that they separated. 2 street porters, loaded with his baggage, received Ben-Hur's orders upon the wharf. To the citadel, he said, a direction which implied an official military connection. 2 great streets, cutting each other at right angles, divided the city into quarters. A curious and immense structure called the Nymphaeum arose at the foot of the one running north and south. When the porters turned south there, the newcomer, though fresh from Rome, was amazed at the magnificence of the avenue. On the right and left there were places, and between them extended indefinitely double colonnades of marble, leaving separate ways for footmen, beasts, and chariots, the whole under shade and cooled by fountains of incessant flow. Ben-Hur was not in mood to enjoy the spectacle. The story of Simonides haunted him. Arrived at the Olymphalus, a monument of 4 arches wide as the streets, superbly illustrated and erected to himself by Epiphanes, the 8th of the Seleucidae, he suddenly changed his mind. I will not go to the citadel tonight, he said to the porters. Take me to the khan nearest the bridge on the road to Seleucia. The party faced about, and in good time he was deposited in a public house of primitive but ample construction within stone's throw of the bridge under which old Simonides had his quarters. He lay upon the housetop through the night. In his inner mind lived the thought, Now, I will hear of home and mother and the dear little Tirzah. If they are on earth, I will find them. Chapter 3, The Demand of Simonides. I keep pronouncing it wrong because I can't decide how it's supposed to be pronounced. I think if it was actually written in Greek, it might be more consistent. Simonides, maybe. What's our power at? Because that's the biggest. We probably have time for this one more chapter. Who says one more chapter? Keep going.
Sure.
Kimmy says sure. What, JJ?
Yeah.
JJ says yeah. Let's see. Some dog outside says roar, 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 roar. I don't know what that means, but sounds great to me. So let's keep going. All right. Chapter 3, The Demand on Simonides. I think it's Simonides. All right. Next day early, to the neglect of the city, Ben-Hur sought the house of Simonides. Through an embattled gateway he passed to a continuity of wharves, thence up the river midst a busy press, to the Seleucian bridge, under which he paused to take in the scene. There, directly under the bridge, was the merchant's house, a mass of grey stone, unhewn, referable to no style, looking, as the voyager had described it, like a buttress of the wall against which it leaned. 2 immense doors in front communicated with the wharf. Some holes near the top, heavily barred, served as windows. Weeds waved from the crevices, and in places black moss splotched the otherwise bald stones. The doors were open. Through one of them businesses went in. Through the other it came out, and there was hurry in all its movements. On the wharf there were piles of goods in every kind of package, and groups of slaves stripped to the waist going about in the abandon of labor. Below the bridge lay a fleet of galleys, some loading, others unloading. A yellow flag blew out, blew out from each masthead. From fleet and wharf and from ship to ship, the bondmen of traffic passed in clamorous countercurrents. Above the bridge, across the river, a wall rose from the water's edge, over which towered the fanciful cornices and turrets of an imperial palace, covering every foot of the island spoken in the Hebrew's description. But with all its suggestions, Ben-Hur scarcely noticed it. Now, at last, he thought to hear of his people. This, certainly, if Simonides had indeed been his father's slave. But would the man acknowledge the relation? That would be to give up his riches and the sovereignty of trade so royally witnessed on the wharf and river. And what was of still greater consequence to the merchant, it would be to forego his career in the midst of amazing success, and yield himself voluntarily once more a slave. Simple thoughts of the demand seemed a monstrous audacity. Stripped of diplomatic address, it was to say, "You are my slave. Give me all you have, and yourself." Yet Ben-Hur derived strength for the interview from faith in his rights and the hope uppermost in his heart. If the story to which he was yielding were true, Simonides belonged to him with all he had. For the wealth, be it said in justice, he cared nothing. When he started to the door, determined in mind, it was with a promise to himself, "Let him tell me of mother and Tirzah, and I will give him his freedom without account." He passed boldly into the house. The interior was that of a vast depot where, in ordered spaces, and under careful arrangement, goods of every kind were heaped and pent. Though the light was murky and the air stifling, men moved about briskly, and in places he saw workmen with saws and hammers making packages for shipments. Down a path between the piles he walked slowly, wondering if the man of whose genius there were here such abounding proofs could have been his father's slave. If so, to what class had he belonged? If a Jew, was he the son of a servant? Or was he a debtor, or a debtor's son? Or had he been sentenced and sold for theft? These thoughts, as they passed, in no wise disturbed the growing respect for the merchant of which he was each instant more and more conscious. A peculiarity of our admiration for another is that it is always looking for circumstances to justify itself. At length a man approached and spoke to him. "What would you have?" "I would see Simonides, the merchant." "Will you come this way?" By a number of paths led in the stowage, they finally came to a flight of steps, ascending which he found himself on the roof of the depot, and in front of a structure which cannot be better described than as a lesser stone house built upon another, invisible from the landing below and out west of the bridge under the open sky. The roof, hemmed in by a low wall, seemed like a terrace, which to his astonishment was brilliant with flowers. In the rich surrounding, the house sat squat, a plain square block, unbroken except by a doorway in front. A dustless path led to the door, though a bordering of shrubs of Persian rose in perfect bloom. Breathing a sweet attar perfume, he followed the guide. At the end of a darkened passage within, they stopped before a curtain half parted. The man called out, "A stranger to see the master." A clear voice replied, "In God's name, let him enter." A Roman might have called the apartment into which the visitor was ushered his atrium. The walls were paneled. Each panel was comparted like a modern office desk, and each compartment crowded with labeled folios, all filamo with age and use. Between the panels, and above and below them, were borders of wood, once white, now tinted like cream, and carved with marvelous intricacy of design. Above a cornice of gilded balls, the ceiling rose in pavilion style until it broke into a shallow dome set with hundreds of panes of violet mica, permitting a flood of light deliciously reposeful. The floor was carpeted with gray rugs so thick that an invading foot fell half-buried and soundless. In the mid-light of the room were two persons, a man resting in a chair, high-backed, broad-armed, and lined with pliant cushions, and at his left, leaning against the back of the chair, a girl, well forward into womanhood. At sight of them, Ben-Hur felt the blood redden his forehead, bowing as much to recover himself as in respect. He lost the lifting of the hands and the shiver and shrink with which the sitter caught sight of him, an emotion as swift to go as it had been to come. When he raised his eyes, the two were in the same position, except the girl's hand had fallen and was resting lightly upon the elder's shoulder. Both of them were regarding him fixedly. "If you are Simonides, the merchant, and a Jew," Ben-Hur stopped an instant, "then the peace of God of our father Abraham upon you and yours." The last word was addressed to the girl. "I am the Simonides of which you speak, by birthright a Jew." The man made answer in a voice singularly clear, "I am Simonides and a Jew, and I return you your salutation, with prayer to know who calls upon me." Ben-Hur looked as he listened, and where the figure of the man should have been in healthful roundness, there was only a formless heap sunk in the depths of the cushions, and covered by a quilted robe of sombre silk. Over the heap shone a head royally proportioned, the ideal head of a statesman and conqueror, a head broad of base and dome-like in front, such as Angelo would have modelled for Caesar. White hair dropped in thin locks over the white brows, deepening the blackness of the eyes, shining through them like sullen lights. The face was bloodless and much puffed with folds, especially under the chin. In other words, the head and face were those of a man who might move the world more readily than the world could move him. A man to be twice 12 times tortured into the shapeless cripple he was. Without a groan, much less a confession, a man to yield his life, but never a purpose or a point, a man born in armor and assailable only through his loves. To him Ben-Hur stretched his hands, open and palm up, as he would offer peace at the same time as he asked it. Why would he hold his palm up when he's talking to the man? Kimmy, do you have any guess? It's kind of a customary thing. JJ, any idea? JJ's out. Okay, perfect. Okay, so the reason why he has his palm up when he's standing there is because he's showing him that he doesn't have a sword in his hand. So a lot of times they would do that and say, "Look, I'm unarmed." So, I mean, that's kind of what they're saying, but basically that's what he's saying. So it's kind of a peaceful gesture. "I am Judah, son of Ithamar, late head of the house of Hur, and a prince of Jerusalem." The merchant's right hand lay outside the robe, a long, thin hand, articulate to deformity with suffering. It closed tightly, otherwise there was not the slightest expression of feeling of any kind on his part, nothing to warrant an inference of surprise or interest, nothing but this calm answer. "The princes of Jerusalem, of the pure blood, are always welcome in my house. You are welcome. Give the young man a seat, Esther." The girl took an ottoman nearby and carried it to Ben-Hur, and she arose from placing the seat, or as she arose, their eyes met. "The peace of our Lord with you," she said modestly. "Be seated and at rest." When she resumed her place by the chair, she had not divined his purpose. The powers of woman go not so far. If the matter is of finer feelings, such as pity, mercy, sympathy, that she detects, and therein it is difference between her and man which will endure as long as she remains. by nature alive to such feelings. She was simply sure he brought some wound of life for healing. Ben-Hur did not take the offered seat, but said deferentially, "I pray the good master Simonides that he will not hold me an intruder. Coming up to the river yesterday, I heard he knew my father. I knew the Prince Hur. We were associated in some enterprises lawful to merchants who find profit in lands beyond the sea and the desert. But sit, I pray you, and Esther, some wine for the young man. Nehemiah speaks of a son of Hur who once ruled the half part of Jerusalem, an old house very old by the faith, in the days of Moses and Joshua. Even some of them found favor in the sight of the Lord, and divided honors with those princes among men. It can hardly be that their descendant lineally come to us will refuse a cup of wine, fat of the genuine vine of Sorek, grown on the south hillsides of Hebron." I'm going to show you the picture now. So here is the picture that we see of, there's Judah talking to Simonides and the young lady Esther, who's standing behind him in the picture. And you don't see a chair there that he could be sitting in, but you kind of assume that there's a chair there for him too. All right, keep going. By the time of the conclusion of this speech, Esther was before Ben-Hur with a silver cup filled from a vase upon a table a little removed from the chair. She offered the drink with downcast face. He touched her hand gently to put it away. Again their eyes met, whereat he noticed that she was small, not nearly to his shoulder in height, but very graceful and fair and sweet of face, with eyes black and inexpressibly soft. She is kind and pretty, he thought, and looks as Tirzah would were she living. Poor Tirzah. Then he said aloud, "No, thy father, if he is thy father." He paused. "I am Esther, the daughter of Simonides," she said with dignity. Then, "Fair Esther, thy father, when he has heard my further speech, will not think worse of me, if yet I am slow to take his wine of famous extract, nor less, I hope, not to lose grace in thy sight. Stand thou here with me a moment." Both of them, as in common cause, turned to the merchants. "Simonides," he said firmly, "my father, at his death, had a trusted servant of thy name, and it has been told me that thou art the man." There was a sudden start of the wretched limbs under the robe, and the thin hand clenched. "Esther, Esther," the man called sternly, "here, not there, as thou art thy mother's child and mine. Here, not there, I say." The girl looked once from father to visitor. Then she replaced the cup upon the table, and went dutifully to the chair. Her countenance sufficiently expressed her wonder and alarm. Simonides lifted his left hand and gave it into hers, lying lovingly upon his shoulder, and said dispassionately, "I have grown old in dealing with men, old beyond my time. If he who told thee that whereof thou speakest was my friend, acquainted with my history, and spoke of it not harshly, he must have persuaded thee that I could not be else than a man distrustful of my kind. The God of Israel help him who, at the end of life, is constrained to acknowledge so much. My loves are few, but they are. One of them is a soul which—" He carried the hand holding his to his lips in manner unmistakable. "A soul which to this time has been unselfishly mine, and such sweet comfort that, were it taken from me, I would die." Esther's head dropped until her cheek touched his. "The other love is but a memory, of which I will say further that, like a benison of the Lord, it hath a compass to contain a whole family, if only—" His voice lowered and trembled. "If only I knew where they were." Ben-Hur's face suffused, and advancing a step, he cried impulsively, "My mother and sister! Oh, it is of them you speak. Esther, as if spoken to, raised her head, but Simonides returned to his calm and answered coldly, Hear me to the end. Because I am that I am, and because of the loves of which I have spoken, before I make return to thy demand touching my relations to the prince her, and as something which of right should come first, do thou show me proof of who thou art. Is thy witness in writing, or cometh it in person? The demand was plain, and the right of it indisputable. Ben-Hur blushed, clasped his hands, stammered, and turned away at loss. Simonides pressed him. The proofs, I say! Set them before me! Lay them in my hands! Yet Ben-Hur made no answer. He had not anticipated the requirement, and now that it was made, to him, as never before, came the awful fact that the 3 years in the galley had carried away all the proofs of his identity. Mother and sister gone. He did not live in the knowledge of any human being. Many there were acquainted with him, but that was all. Had Quintus Arrius been present, what could he have said more than where he found him, and that he believed the pretender to be the son of her? But, as will presently appear in full, the brave Roman sailor was dead. Judah had felt the loneliness before, to the core of life. The sense struck him now. He stood, hands clasped, face averted, in stupefaction. Simonides respected his suffering, and waited in silence. Master Simonides, he said at length, I can only tell my story, and I will not that unless you stay judgment so long, and with good will deign to hear me. Speak, said Simonides, now indeed master of the situation. Speak, and I will listen the more willingly that I have not denied you to be the very person you claim yourself. Ben-Hur proceeded then, and told his life hurriedly, yet with the feeling which in the source of all eloquence, but as we are familiar with it, down to his landing at Misenum, in company with Arrius, returned victorious from the Aegean. At that point we will take up the words. My benefactor was loved and trusted by the emperor, who heaped him with honorable rewards. The merchants of the East contributed magnificent presents, and he became doubly rich among the rich of Rome. May a Jew forget his religion, or his birthplace, if it were the holy land of our fathers? The good man adopted me to his son by formal rights of law, and I strove to make him just return. No child was ever more dutiful to father than I to him. He would have had me a scholar in art, philosophy, rhetoric, oratory. He would have furnished me the most famous teacher. I declined his insistence because I was a Jew, and could not forget the Lord God, or the glory of the prophets, or the city set on the hills by David and Solomon. Oh, ask you why I accepted any of the benefactions of the Roman. I loved him. Next place, I thought I could, with his help, array influences which would enable me one day to unseal the mystery close-locking the fate of my mother and sister. And to these there was yet another motive, of which I shall not speak, except to say it controlled me so far that I devoted myself to arms, and the acquisition of everything deemed essential to thorough knowledge of the art of war. In the palastrae and circuses of the city I toiled, and in the camps no less, and in all of them I have a name, but not that of my fathers. The crowns I won, and on the walls of the villa by the Misenum, there are many of them, all came to me as the son of Arrius, the Duumvir. In that relation only am I known among the Romans. In steadfast pursuit of my secret aim, I left Rome for Antioch, intending to accompany the consul Maxentius in the campaign he is organizing against the Parthians. master of personal skill in all arms, I seek the higher knowledge pertaining to the conduct of bodies of men in the field. The consul has admitted me one of his military family, but yesterday, as our ship entered the Orontes, 2 other ships sailed in with us, flying yellow flags. A fellow passenger and countryman from Cyprus explained that the vessels belonged to Simonides, the master merchant of Antioch. He told us also who the merchant was, his marvelous success in commerce, of his fleets and caravans, and the coming and going, and not knowing I had interest in the theme beyond my associate listeners. He said Simonides was a Jew, once the servant of the prince Hur, nor did he conceal the cruel ties of Gratus, or the purpose of their infliction. At this allusion Simonides bowed his head, and, as if to help him conceal his feelings and her own deep sympathy, the daughter hid her face on his neck. Directly he raised his eyes and said in a clear voice, "I am listening." "Oh, good Simonides," Ben-Hur then said, advancing a step, his whole soul seeking expression, "I see thou art not convinced, and that yet I stand in the shadow of thy distrust." The merchant held his features fixed as marble, and his tongue was still. "And not less clearly I see the difficulties of my position," Ben-Hur continued. "All my Roman connections I can prove. I have only to call upon the consul, now the guest of the governor of the city, but I cannot prove I am my father's son. They who could serve me in that, alas, they are dead or lost." He covered his face with his hands, whereupon Esther arose, and taking the rejected cup to him, said, "The wine is of the country we all so love. Drink, I pray thee." The voice was sweet as that of Rebekah offering drink at the well near Nahor the city. He saw there were tears in her eyes, and he drank, saying, "Daughter of Simonides, thy heart is full of goodness, and merciful art thou to let the stranger share it with thy father. Be thou blessed of our God, I thank thee." Then he addressed himself to the merchant again. As I have no proof that I am my father's son, I will withdraw that I demanded of thee, O Simonides, and go hence to trouble you no more. Only let me say, I did not seek thy return to servitude, nor account of thy fortune. In any event, I would have said, as now I say, that all which is product of thy labor and genius is thine. Keep it in welcome. I have no need of any part thereof. When the good Quintus, my second father, sailed on the voyage which was his last, he left me his heir, princely rich. If therefore thou dost think of me again, be it with remembrance of this question, which, as I do swear by the prophets and Jehovah, thy God and mine, was the chief purpose of my coming here. What dost thou know? What canst thou tell me of my mother and Tirzah, my sister, she who should be in beauty and grace, even as this one, thy sweetness of life, if not thy very life? Oh, what canst thou tell me of them? The tears ran down Esther's cheeks, but the man was wilful. In a clear voice he replied, "I have said I knew the prince of Ben-Hur. I remember hearing of the misfortune which overtook his family. I remember the bitterness with which I heard it. He who wrought such misery to the widow of my friend is the same who, in the same spirit, hath since wrought upon me. I will go further and say to you, I have made diligent quest concerning the family, but I have nothing to tell you of them. They are lost." Ben-Hur uttered a great groan. Then it is another hope broken," he said, struggling with his feelings. "I am used to disappointments. I pray you pardon my intrusion, and if I have occasioned you annoyance, forgive it because of my sorrow. I have nothing now to live for but vengeance. Farewell." At the curtain he turned and simply said, "I thank you both." "Peace go with you," the merchant said. Esther could not speak for sobbing. and so he departed. Chapter 4 is Simonides and Esther, and we will read that tomorrow. I hope that you're enjoying Ben-Hur. JJ is sleeping. Dude, this one's oh, okay, that's 2 chapters. So, yeah, I was going to say that's a long chapter, but all right. And we will continue that tomorrow. So, let me know what your favorite part of today is. Put it in the comments. And I'm going to bid you adieu. And hopefully we get the lighting situation fixed without having some kind of precarious problem going along the hallway here. So God bless you guys. Have a good night. I hope to see you all again. All right. Bye.